Now in late March, early spring arrives in the UK, and that's the time when vegetable growers start thinking about what vegetables they're going to grow for the growing season. But also it's a fantastic time to start growing a number of vegetables to give you a really good head start going into the growing season. But there are a number of vegetables that you can start sowing right away. So when the temperature does start to increase and the growing conditions improve, you'll have seedlings ready to plant straight out. And in this video, I'm going to share with you a number of vegetables that I'm going to be sowing over the next couple of weeks in early spring to give me a really good head start. I'll also share with you my favourite varieties to maybe give you one or two ideas. Now I'm based right in the centre of the UK, so my suggestions are going to be perfectly suitable for most people in the UK. There might be slight variations if you live in the very north, like in Scotland, or maybe even in the very south. If you live outside the UK, then I'm in growing zone number 8, so you will need to adjust your sowing and growing times based upon your particular growing conditions and your climate. Now, before I give my suggestions about which vegetables I'm going to grow in early spring, we need to bear in mind that this time of year, the temperature is still a little bit cold, so there's still a possibility of frosts. So most of the suggestions that I'm going to make in this video are going to be starting off in cell trays indoors. Now that could be whether you've got a greenhouse or a polyhouse, or whether you've got an indoor growing space where you've got a nice warm windowsill. They're great to start off your vegetables. And even though one or two of my suggestions can be sowed outside in the right conditions, I will grow most of them into seedlings indoors and then transfer them outside ready for when the temperature is warm enough. Now when it gets to early spring, if you haven't done so already, now's a good time to sow your tomatoes. As you can see here, I've got tomatoes that I sowed in the middle of January. The front plants are called Marmande, which is an outdoor bush variety, and they grow really nice large beef tomatoes. Grew these last year and they're absolutely fabulous. And the ones behind are a variety called Red Cherry, and as you can imagine, they're the smaller tomatoes. There's plenty of varieties of tomatoes on the market, and you will probably grow your favourites. A really popular one is one called Moneymaker, which I know a lot of people grow every single year. Now early spring is when you should really start thinking about planting your tomatoes if you haven't done so already, because when you get into the latter part of April, it almost becomes a little bit late. These were started off in a propagator because tomatoes will need temperatures of 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, which is actually soil temperature. And when they're germinated, because I haven't got a heated greenhouse, I put them on a windowsill in the house. These are now ready for repotting. I'm not going to use all these. As always, I always grow more than I need, because then you've got a fallback if some of them aren't successful. I'm probably going to keep about 6 of each variety, and the rest of them I'm going to gift to family and friends. And in addition to tomatoes, there's also peppers. I've also got peppers which are not as large as these inside the house, 2 varieties, one called DKN and one called jalapeno, and they've not long emerged. They will probably need another couple of weeks before I prick them out and repot them. But another variety I'll be sowing over the next week or two in early spring is a sweet pepper called California Wonder. Like all peppers, they like warm temperatures to germinate. So really they're going to need a really nice warm windowsill, or be put near a radiator, or electric propagator will do the job. So therefore tomatoes and peppers are excellent vegetables to start sowing in early spring. Now another great vegetable to start early in spring are peas. Now peas are fantastic because they don't really mind cold temperatures, so you could sow them outside if you have the right growing conditions. Now I haven't actually prepared my growing beds just yet. I'm a little bit behind this year, so I'm not going to plant mine directly outside, so I'm going to start them inside in cell trays. There are quite a few advantages about starting peas indoors, because when they start to emerge from the ground and become into seedlings, they will get eaten if you don't protect them. Another way of doing it, which I did a few years ago, and there is a video on my channel showing you this, I started them inside a plastic gutter. Now you have to drill some drainage holes in the bottom, fill it with compost, and then put your seeds in, and when they're large enough, you dig a very, very shallow trench, and all you need to do is push the compost and the seedlings out of the gutter into place. That worked really well. I haven't got the provision to do that this year, so I am going to be starting these in cell trays. Now because of the height that the peas will grow, they are going to need some support. That could be some form of frame, it could be netting, but you will need to provide something. I usually sow them in a zigzag pattern, usually 5 centimetres or 2 inches deep. Cover them over with a nice bit of compost and then just water them. One thing I like about peas, as long as they're protected, they don't generally require an awful lot of maintenance, and they produce quite a heavy crop. These are a variety I'm going for the first time called Hurst Green Shaft, and they do look like a really good yielding crop, so I'll let you know how I get on with these in future videos. Something else I'll be starting in early spring are my brassicas. Now cabbages, cauliflowers, broccolis, kale, Brussels sprouts, they're all classified under the Brassica family. But for now, I'm going to be starting 2 varieties of cabbage and 1 variety of kale. I will grow Brussels sprouts, but I'll probably wait till the end of April to start those. So the 2 varieties of cabbage I'll be sowing is one called Greyhound, and the other one is called January King 3. Again, I grew these last year and they do produce absolutely fabulous cabbage. Now, none of you who watch my videos on a regular basis will be surprised to know that I'll be growing dwarf green curled kale, which is the only real variety of kale that I ever grow. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, this time of year in early spring, these will be sown in cell trays, but I'll only be sowing a few of them. The seeds for brassicas are really small, and all you want to do is put a few seeds in your fingers and just sprinkle them into a very small pot, unless of course you've got a large growing space, because they will produce an awful lot of plants. Now, because the seeds are so small, all I will do is sprinkle them on top of the cell tray and put a dusting of compost on top. In fact, I might just put a covering of vermiculite. If you've got vermiculite, then you can just cover the seeds with that instead of compost. If not, just a sprinkle of compost will be absolutely fine, and give them a good water. Now, the good news about brassicas is they don't need warm temperatures to germinate. Typically 12 to 13 degrees centigrade, so you won't need a propagator or a heated sill or anything like that to germinate these. They grow quite happily in my potting shed, which has got no heating whatsoever. They'll probably start to emerge after around about 3 to 4 weeks, and then I'll grow them on when they get to the right size. And they're a really good veg to start growing in early spring. You can sow these directly outdoors, but you need to wait really till the beginning of May onwards. And of course, the big advantage of starting them indoors, particularly when they're small seedlings, is you protect them from all the pests and the birds. So by the time you do plant them out, they're a decent size. Now behind me I've got the makings of my compost bin. It's not put together yet, the pallets are just standing together. In the next video after this one, I'm going to show you how to make a really quick compost bin using timber pallets, so watch out for that video. Now, one vegetable that me and my family really love is beetroot, and there is such a wonderful variety of beetroot available. It really comes down to your own personal choice. Now, because of the time of year, I will be starting my beetroot in cell trays, but I'm actually not a real fan of doing that. It's just because of the time of year. I much prefer to plant the beetroot directly into the ground, but I do want to make an early start with 1 or 2 varieties, so I'm going to do that this year, and then when they're big enough, I will transplant them out. I just find that beetroot don't transplant as well as other vegetables, but I've got 3 nice varieties here I want to share with you so that maybe you can give them a try yourself. The first one's a classic, it's called bolt hardy. This could be sowed directly in the ground from March onwards, but because of the risk of potential frost, I'm not going to take that chance, and I will start them in cell trays. So bolt hardy is the first variety. Second variety is a new variety that I've never grown before called Detroit 2. From the image on the packet, it does seem to produce similar types of size and shape of beetroot compared to bolt hardy, so that should be pretty good. The third one, which is one I grew for the first time last year and I was really happy with, is a variety called Monetta, and I'll be growing them again this year. I've got half a packet of seeds left here from last year, so I'll be planting them in cell trays. Now, beetroot seeds are like little tiny clusters, and they are large enough to handle, so you can separate them into individual cells. Unlike the brassicas, which are really tiny seeds and really hard to handle, you can separate these out to make sure that you put 1 seed in each cell, and that saves you separating them out when they get bigger if you had more than 1 seed per cell. Again, these don't require particularly warm temperatures for germination, and typically anything around about 15 degrees centigrade will be good enough to germinate your beetroot. And when the seedlings are large enough, I'll transplant them outside when my growing beds are ready at a distance of around about 10 centimetres, which is about 4 inches apart. So beetroot is another good veg to start in early spring. Now, one of my absolute favourite vegetables that I'll be starting early spring is celery. Now, I grew celery for the first time around about 2 years ago as an experiment, and honestly, the taste of your homegrown celery is nothing like you'll ever taste from bought celery, in my opinion. Now, the variety I've grown, and the only variety I've ever grown, is Octavius F1. These will be sown indoors in cell trays. Now, the way to sow these, because the seeds are so small, is to put the compost into the cell tray, just gently tamp it down with your hand and water it first. So water the compost first before you put the seeds in, then sprinkle the seeds on top, and then you can do a number of things. You can either put a very thin coating of vermiculite or perlite on top, or a very thin coating of compost, but very thin. Now, last year I tried 1 cell without putting anything on top of the seeds whatsoever, and they all germinated. So that works as well. Now the thing I found about celery is they don't need warm temperatures at all to germinate, but they are very slow in germination. The first time I grew these, I thought I'd lost them. I didn't see any life in them for a number of weeks, and I literally thought that they weren't going to grow, but they did. So after about a month they started to emerge very, very tiny plants, and then I just let them grow on a little bit, and then you separate them out, prick them out and transplant them just like you would any other type of vegetable. For celery, however, it seems to me that when you're pricking them out, they do appear to be a lot smaller than other vegetables that you are pricking out, but as long as you handle them gently, they'll be absolutely fine. But I would recommend, if you do like celery and you want to grow it, then definitely try this variety, Octavius F1, and another wonderful vegetable to grow in early spring. Now, always a fantastic veg to get an early start with is lettuce. There's so many great varieties out there, and you can sow them in early spring. If you look at the sowing instructions for most varieties of lettuce, they will tell you to plant them directly outside, but I've always started mine indoors in sow trays and then transplanted them out when they're large enough. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing over the next week to get my lettuce started. Now, one thing I found about lettuce, you get so many seeds in a packet, you're better off just sowing a few seeds per sowing. So for example, when the season really starts to kick in from the end of May onwards, I'll be sowing lettuce every 2 to 3 weeks, and that way I've got a successive supply of lettuce all the way through the summer and into early autumn. Don't make the mistake I did when I first started growing lettuce. I planted the whole packet, and I'm sure some of you new growers have made that mistake, and you end up with a glut of lettuce which you just can't use. So over the years I've learned with most vegetables to sow what I need, so sow in small amounts as you need them, and lettuce is no different. Now there are some fantastic varieties out there. Iceberg is a really popular variety, as are Webbs, which are the type of lettuce that form into a heart. But my absolute favourite lettuce is a variety called Lakeland. I've grown these for years, and they're really lovely crispy lettuce, and they're very, very easy to grow. So if you haven't tried Lakeland, maybe you want to give them a try. Not exactly lettuce, but very similar in terms of a salad leaf is rocket as well, and that's something that always adds something extra to a salad with its sharper, peppery type of taste compared to lettuce. This is just a variety called rocket mixed, so there's a few little varieties in there. Lettuce and rocket and salad leaves are one of those vegetables that are so easy to grow. I'll put these in cell trays. They won't need warm temperatures. They'll probably germinate in around about 14 days and then transplanted, and then when they're large enough and the weather conditions are better and I've got my growing beds ready, I'll transplant them outside. And my final suggestion for this video for sowing vegetables in early spring are spring onions. Just like lettuce, we use lettuce on a regular basis all the way through the year. Spring onions are exactly the same. And just like the lettuce, I'll be sowing these every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the summer and into autumn to give me a regular supply. Now, another vegetable with loads of choice of varieties for you to grow. And I've grown quite a number. White Lisbon you may be familiar with, which a lot of people grow and a lot of people love. I grew a variety which wasn't very successful last year called Isikura, but my favourite variety of spring onions is a variety called Ramrod. These produce really good, strong spring onions, and I've always had success with these. If you've not tried these before, these are definitely worth a go, so make sure you give them a try. Now, just like the lettuce, most of the sowing instructions suggest that these should go straight outside, but I always start them in cell trays and then transplant them out. It just gives them, in my opinion, a better start, and that's why I'll also be sowing these in early spring. These will be ready to plant outside when the weather's a little bit warmer and I've got my growing beds ready. Now, something I picked up from Charles Dowding in relation to sowing spring onions is to sow them in clusters, not try to do them as individual seeds. So in a cell, I might sow 5 or 6 seeds together, and when I transplant them, I won't separate them, I just transplant them into a cluster. Because it's very unlikely you're going to want to harvest one spring onion at a time, so it makes sense that they're sown and grown in clusters, and it saves all the separation, and they still grow to a really good size. These will be sown in the cell trays to a depth of around about 1.5 centimetres, which is around about ½ inch, covered with a little bit of compost and watered. And these won't need warm temperatures to germinate either, so they're another real easy crop to grow, well worth sowing in early spring. So there you have a few fantastic suggestions of vegetables that you might start think of growing in early spring to give yourself a head start into the growing season. Now there's lots of other types and varieties of vegetables that you might start to grow yourself in early spring that I've not covered in the video, but those are my suggestions for what I'll be growing. But if you are growing vegetables or other varieties that have been successful for you in the past, or they're just your favourite vegetables, then pop them in the comments below, because that'll be great to share with other vegetable growers to give them and myself some ideas. I hope you found the video interesting and useful, and it's given you one or two ideas, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you do want to subscribe to the channel for how to sow and grow fruit and veg and flowers and one or two recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.